The day it happened felt darker than any other day in that grand estate. It was already past noon, and the thick clouds outside gave the sky a gloomy color. Everyone in the living room could sense the tension in the air. There stood Mira, the billionaire's wife, her face twisted in anger as she clenched a letter in her right hand. Her voice trembled with rage as she screamed at the top of her lungs, "Get out of my house, you worthless old woman." The target of her fury, a sweet, elderly nanny named Olivia, stood shaking, tears in her eyes, as the entire staff looked on. The words Mira threw at her stung like a swarm of bees, and no one dared make a sound. Even though everyone was used to Myra's temper, no one expected such a moment of absolute cruelty. The nanny had cared for Ethan, the billionaire husband, since he was a small boy. She had been there when he scraped his knee at 6 years old. She held him in her arms when he cried from nightmares about monsters under his bed. She was the gentle presence who read him bedtime stories and taught him how to tie his shoes. And now, in the hallway, where portraits of fine art and ancient family heirlooms lined the walls, she was brought so low that she could barely lift her gaze. She squeezed her hands together, trying to remain calm, but her trembling chin showed how hurt she was. "I said get out." Mira screamed again, her voice echoing off the marble floors. She marched forward and pointed toward the large double doors at the entrance. "You are nothing here. I am his wife, and I make the rules. If I say you're fired, that's final." The entire staff watched in horror. None of them had ever liked Mira because of her pride, but no one dared stand up to her, not even the butler, who was older than the nanny and had served Ethan's family for decades. Everyone worried about losing their job. Yet they also knew the depth of the nanny's bond with Ethan. How could anyone treat her this way? At that moment, the door opened, and Ethan walked in. He was tall, with a kind face that usually looked calm in any situation. But that day, he looked more serious than ever. He saw Myra's furious expression and Olivia's tear-stained face. At once, he rushed forward and put an arm around his old nanny. He asked, "What's going on? Why is everyone standing here?" His question carried a deep tone of concern. Mira snarled, "She's disloyal, Ethan. I caught her going through my private mail. I found her reading a letter that was for me. She had no business touching it." The staff seemed confused because none of them could imagine Olivia crossing any line. She was the purest soul in that mansion. Ethan frowned. "Is that true, Nanny?" he asked gently, though his eyes were filling with doubt. Olivia's voice quavered. "I did pick up a letter, but I swear I only did it because it fell off the table and was about to slide under the armchair. I was just about to return it to Mrs. Mira when she found me holding it. I would never read someone else's private mail." Mira scoffed, her nails digging into her palms. "Lies. I know what I saw. You were prying into my personal matters, and I won't allow it. You are fired. I want you gone right now." A hush spread through the entire hall. Everyone knew that if Mira wanted it, she could throw Olivia out. She was, after all, Ethan's wife, with legal rights to manage the staff. But she did not own the estate outright. The estate belonged to Ethan, inherited from his family. He had a say in who could stay and who could go. Mira glared at Ethan, clearly challenging him. "Are you going to stand with me, or do you want to defend this old bag who keeps meddling where she doesn't belong?" At that moment, Ethan took a deep breath. His eyes flickered with anger, but he kept his voice low and steady. "Olivia has been with me all my life," he said. "She is like a second mother to me. If she says she didn't read your letter, then I believe her. We all know her honesty." Myra's fury escalated, and her cheeks reddened. "I won't let you undermine me in front of everyone," she hissed. "Either she leaves, or I do. If you can't support your wife's decision, then you must be choosing her over me." Another silence fell. No one dared even breathe too loudly, watching how Ethan would respond. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words did not come easily. His hands trembled slightly, and the staff felt sorry for him. He stood in a very difficult position. Either dismiss the nanny who raised him like a son, or defy the woman he married. That was only the start of the nightmare. Mira was not going to let things go. She demanded that the nanny be gone by the end of the day. But Ethan, who always tried to avoid conflicts, managed to convince her to let him handle the matter. He needed time to think. He asked Mira to wait until the weekend before doing anything final. She agreed, but with a strict warning that if he did not side with her by then, she would leave him and take everything she could. What followed was a tense period in the mansion. Mira refused to speak to Olivia. She gave her nasty looks at every turn. She made snide remarks about how the nanny was so old-fashioned and out of touch. And Olivia, broken-hearted, spent most of her time in her small attic room, unsure if she would have a home by the end of the week. Ethan felt deep conflict in his heart. He did not want to lose his wife, even if she was cruel at times. But he also could not stand the idea of sending away the woman who had cared for him like a mother. He knew how many sacrifices Olivia had made. She had missed out on her own personal dreams to remain with him and watch him grow. She was there to comfort him when he lost his parents in an accident. She was the one who taught him that being wealthy did not mean ignoring kindness. As the days passed, Ethan quietly arranged to talk to the staff and learn the truth about what had happened with the letter. He soon realized that Olivia's story lined up with what the other staff members had witnessed, that the letter simply fell off the table. But Ethan knew his wife's pride would not let her admit she had reacted unfairly. As the weekend approached, tensions grew. Mira began telling her friends that she might be leaving the estate soon. She dropped hints that Ethan was weak and too attached to the past, so she had no option but to draw a line in the sand. She spent much of her time talking to lawyers, gathering documents. Meanwhile, in the hush of the large house, the staff felt uneasy. They did not want to see Olivia mistreated, but they also feared for their own jobs. If Mira left and took a share of Ethan's fortune, who knew how many of them would also be dismissed? On Friday evening, Ethan finally made a decision. He knew there was one person he had to speak to, Olivia herself. He found her in the small corner of the garden at the back of the property, tending to her favorite flowers. She looked frail, with tears hidden in the corners of her eyes. Yet she still had that warmth that had always made Ethan feel safe. He knelt beside her. "Nanny," he said, his voice soft. "I can't tell you how sorry I am for the pain you're going through. I never wanted this." She gently touched his shoulder. "It's not your fault," she whispered. "I know you've grown up now and have different responsibilities. If you must let me go, I understand. You have a marriage to keep." Ethan looked down at the soil. "I don't want you to leave, ever. You've been here for me more than anyone else in my life. But I also know I chose to marry Mira. I promised to stand by her, through better or worse. But her behavior has been so cruel. I hardly recognize her." Olivia sighed. Sometimes, people hide their true colors until stress shows who they really are. "I'm not telling you to leave her. I'm not telling you to choose me over your marriage. I just don't want you to abandon your own sense of right and wrong. That's what your father taught you, and that's what your mother wished for you." Ethan rubbed his eyes, trying to keep tears from falling. "I need to make a choice soon," he said. "Mira gave me an ultimatum. She wants me to fire you, or she will walk out." Olivia's eyes watered. "I'll respect whatever you decide. I only want you to be happy." That night, Ethan barely slept. He kept thinking about the sweet nanny who had never once raised her voice at him. The woman who had always stood up for him in front of relatives, who claimed he was just a spoiled rich kid. She taught him humility. She taught him to share his lunch with children who had none. She was the guiding light in his life. Meanwhile, he recalled how Mira had changed from the cheerful bride he met at a charity event to the furious, impatient woman she had become. She seemed unable to handle her own frustrations, taking them out on Olivia, the staff, and sometimes even Ethan himself. By morning, Ethan resolved to do something big. He asked the entire household to gather in the main hall. When everyone was there, Mira included, he stood on the steps by the grand fireplace and cleared his throat. The staff looked worried, and Olivia stood at the back, her hands clasped, head bowed in fear of what might happen. "Mira," he said, looking at his wife, "I have thought about your demand. I know you want Olivia to be gone. You said I must choose between you and her. So here is my answer." Mira arched an eyebrow. The staff felt their hearts pounding, including Olivia. The tension was so thick it weighed on them like a heavy blanket. Ethan inhaled deeply and spoke with a firmness none of them had ever heard before. "This estate is my inheritance. My father built it not just for our family, but also for those who have loved and served us with loyalty. Olivia is part of that family. She saved my life more times than I can count. She taught me to be kind and honest. She was there when I had nothing but tears to offer. And I will never betray her. She does not deserve to be fired. She deserves our respect." Myra's eyes flashed. "So you choose her over me?" she asked, her voice breaking. "After all we've been through?" Ethan raised his chin and said, "I am not choosing her over you. I am choosing what is right over what is wrong. What you demanded was cruel. You spoke to her in a way I cannot tolerate. I will stand by what is good, and just, even if that means losing you." A collective gasp filled the hall. Myra's lips parted, and for a second, the anger in her eyes wavered. She glanced around the room, seeing the staff stare at her. Some of them were silently cheering Ethan on. Others just watched to see what she would do. "Fine," Myra managed, her voice cold. "You have made your choice. I will call my lawyer and leave immediately. I will not stay in a house that puts me second to a servant." The butler, the maids, the drivers, everyone watched as Myra stormed upstairs to her suite. Ethan turned around to face Olivia. She looked pale, like she could faint at any moment, but also relieved. She opened her mouth, trying to say something, but only a choked sob came out. Ethan walked over and embraced her with warmth that brought tears to more eyes than just Olivia's. Even the strong butler wiped at his face. In that quiet moment, the only sound was the slow shuffle of Myra's feet as she walked down the hallway, suitcases in hand. She gave no glance back. She simply headed outside, set her luggage in one of the cars, and left. The roar of the engine was the last echo of her presence. For the next few days, the mansion was strangely calm. No one had to tread on eggshells for fear of annoying Myra. The staff carried out their tasks with relief. Olivia went about her routine, cooking special meals, tidying up and making sure that Ethan did not look too sad. But the truth was, Ethan was sad. He was not heartless. He had loved Myra and wanted a happy marriage. Now, with the ultimatum she gave, he had no choice but to pick a side. He felt guilt, regret, and heartbreak all at once. One evening, he sat in the massive dining room alone. The long table was set for one. A lonely candle flickered. The fine china and silverware sparkled, but the seat beside him was empty. He remembered the early days of their marriage when Myra laughed with him, sharing playful jokes about his habit of waking up too early. He recalled her excitement when she helped decorate the mansion with fresh flowers and new furniture. He wondered what went wrong. Could he have prevented this outcome? As he finished his meal and prepared to head upstairs, the front door opened. In walked Myra, her eyes puffy, her expression unsure. She looked around the entrance hall, clearly overwhelmed by memories of how she had left. Ethan stood at the edge of the dining room arch, his heart pounding in his chest. Seeing her again made a swirl of hope and dread mix inside him. She noticed him standing there and took a shaky breath. I forgot a few things," she said, her voice lacking the usual arrogance. She lowered her eyes. Ethan observed her. "I see," he replied softly. "The staff can pack up anything you still want. You just have to let us know." She nodded. For a moment, they both stood there, the silence broken only by the grandfather clock ticking in the corner. Then she spoke again, her lips trembling. "Ethan, can we talk for a minute?" Without a word, he led her to the sitting room. She took a seat on the velvet couch that she once handpicked. He sat across from her, leaning slightly forward. He was prepared for another heated argument or a list of demands. Instead, she wiped her eyes and spoke in a very different tone. "I acted terribly," she admitted. "I won't pretend I was right. I was jealous of your closeness with her. I've never felt as important to you as she was. I hated it. That day, when I saw her holding my letter from the fertility specialist, I thought she was prying. I felt so vulnerable, And I lashed out. Ethan's brow furrowed. Fertility specialist? Mira took a deep breath. I never told you this, but I've been worried that we can't have children. I thought you might blame me, so I was looking for answers on my own. Then I saw Olivia with my letter, and I snapped. I thought, great, another person who gets to be closer to my husband than I am. Another person who can give Ethan something I can't. My anger got the best of me. I was cruel to her. I was cruel to you. And I see now how wrong I was. Ethan's eyes filled with a sympathetic sadness. You could have told me. We could have handled it together. We might have found help or therapy. Myra's gaze dropped to her lap. I was scared you wouldn't understand. But it doesn't excuse what I did. I threatened your nanny. I humiliated her. I even humiliated myself by throwing that tantrum and leaving. I know you made your choice because I forced you to. I gave you an ultimatum, and it was wrong. Ethan did not speak for a long moment. He thought back to all the bitterness that had built up between them. He also thought about how she never communicated this fear about not being able to have children. He looked down at his hands. I loved you, he finally said, voice unsteady. I still do in some way. But the way you handled your anger was so hurtful. Mira nodded in shame. I know. And I'm asking if there's any way I can make amends. I'll apologize to Olivia. I'll do whatever it takes. I was too proud before, but I'll put that aside now. Before Ethan could answer, Olivia herself appeared at the doorway. She had come to bring them tea, not knowing that Mira was there. Upon seeing Mira, she paused, uncertain. Her gentle eyes fell on Ethan, then moved to Myra's tear-streaked face. She set the tea tray down on a small table and spoke with that same calming voice she always had. I'm sorry for interrupting. I heard there was a visitor, so I thought some warm tea would be nice. If you need privacy, I can leave. Mira stood up, her hands trembling. No, please. Don't go. I need to say something to you. She walked closer to Olivia, tears forming again. I am sorry for all the horrible things I said to you. It wasn't right. I know you were only trying to pick up the letter. I know how important you are to Ethan, and I shouldn't have disrespected you that way. You cared for him before I ever knew him. You shaped him into the wonderful man he is today. I was wrong to treat you like an enemy. Olivia's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of empathy. She placed a gentle hand on Myra's shoulder. I forgive you, she said softly. I know what fear can do to a person, and I know you love him, too. I don't blame you for feeling insecure. Mira let out a shaky sigh of relief. She nodded, then lowered her head once more. Ethan watched this exchange, amazed by how easily Olivia offered forgiveness. It reminded him again why he had refused to cast her out. After a few moments, they all sat down. Mira explained everything to Olivia. The letter, the fear of not being able to have a baby, the jealousy that she felt whenever Ethan showed affection for his nanny. Ethan added details about how torn he was between them both. Olivia listened patiently, placing her hand over Myra's now and then to comfort her. Eventually, Mira asked, Is there any chance you both can give me another shot? I know I don't deserve an easy acceptance, but I promise I will change. Ethan looked at Olivia. Olivia offered him a soft smile, as if to say, It's your decision. He squeezed Myra's hand. I'm willing to try if you are truly ready to work on this. I have to trust that you won't lash out in anger again. Mira nodded earnestly. I promise. That night, Mira stayed in one of the mansion's guest rooms. The staff were hesitant around her, but she went out of her way to speak to them kindly and apologize for her past behavior. Some of them remained cautious, worried that this was temporary. But Olivia, sensing Myra's sincerity, approached them and said that she believed Mira was telling the truth. The next day, Ethan arranged for a small gathering in the garden. He wanted to give Mira a chance to apologize to everyone in a more formal setting. The staff gathered among the rose bushes while the sun shone brightly overhead. Mira stepped forward, wearing a simple dress, not the fancy designer outfits she used to flaunt. She stood next to Ethan and held his hand. To all of you, she began, I know I haven't been fair. I've said mean things. I've shown no respect for the love and care you give to this home. I want to say I'm sorry. I hope you can find it in your hearts to forgive me. I want to do better." Some of the staff exchanged glances. The butler cleared his throat and spoke. "Mrs. Mira, you have given us a lot of grief in the past. But if Mr. Ethan and Miss Olivia can forgive you, then we will do our best to do the same. We only ask that you treat us with kindness." With that, the tension began to melt away. There were relieved smiles, soft cheers, and a sense of hope that maybe the household could return to a peaceful way of living. Over the next few weeks, Mira continued to show genuine efforts. She stopped giving orders in a demeaning tone. She asked Olivia for advice on home-cooked meals and even spent time helping in the kitchen, learning recipes from her. She thanked the staff each time they did something for her. She started volunteering with Ethan at charities, reminding herself why she fell in love with him in the first place: his heart for helping people. Ethan, for his part, realized he had to communicate better with Mira. He understood her fears about infertility and assured her that, children or not, they would face things as a team. This removed one big wedge between them. With time, they went to a specialist together and learned about possible treatments. They set aside all blame and replaced it with shared hope. Most importantly, Mira worked on her relationship with Olivia. The older nanny had no reason to trust Mira again, but being the caring soul she was, she offered her friendship. In fact, one afternoon, when Mira felt discouraged about her treatment results, Olivia found her crying in the corridor. Instead of walking away, Olivia sat beside her and comforted her. In that moment, Mira realized that this woman was not just a nanny, she was like family, and maybe even the mother figure Mira had never had. One day, while they were having tea in the sitting room, Mira turned to Olivia and said, "I know I can never undo the hurtful words I said, but I want you to know that I'm thankful you stayed, for Ethan's sake and for mine. If it were not for your forgiveness, I might still be bitter and alone." Olivia smiled, took Myra's hand, and replied, "I stayed because Ethan chose to do what was right. He reminded me that people can change if they are truly sorry. And I can see that change in you." The atmosphere in the mansion transformed into a place of warmth and unity. The staff no longer walked on eggshells. They joked with each other and shared light-hearted conversations with Mira whenever they saw her. Ethan felt relieved that his once happy home was returning to peace. And though the fertility treatments remained uncertain, the fact that they faced the challenge together gave them both courage. A year later, a surprise came that made everyone in the mansion rejoice. Mira found out she was pregnant. The day she told Ethan, she trembled with excitement. She took him into the same garden where the final standoff had once taken place and revealed the news. He lifted her off her feet and swung her around with laughter. When Olivia heard, she hugged Mira tight, tears in her eyes, whispering that she was proud of her. The staff clapped and cheered, thrilled that their once troubled mistress now seemed genuinely happy. Months went by, and the baby arrived, a little girl with bright eyes. Mira named her Grace, as a reminder of the forgiveness and second chance she had been given. She insisted that Olivia hold the baby first after her and Ethan. It was a gentle gesture that said, "I want you to be part of our family always." On that day, as the staff came to see the newborn, Ethan stood beside Mira with Olivia at his other side. He looked at his wife, who wore a tired but blissful smile, and he looked at his beloved Nanny, whose eyes shone with pride. The world felt right again. He saw how far they had come since that awful day when Myra's screams tore through the halls. He remembered the ultimatum, how he had chosen Olivia, chosen right over wrong. That choice could have destroyed his marriage, but in the end it saved them all, because it forced Mira to face her own wrongdoing and become a better person. As the baby's cries echoed softly in the large room, Ethan gave Olivia a grateful nod. She smiled back, understanding that she had done what she always did, cared for him in his toughest moments. And now she would care for his daughter, too. The staff looked on with misty eyes, because they saw what a true family looked like, not just people bound by blood or by law, but by respect, love, and forgiveness. Mira held little Grace close, kissing the baby's forehead. She glanced up at Olivia. "Thank you for staying," she whispered, "and for helping me learn how to love without fear." Olivia placed a hand over Myra's. "It is my honor to be part of this family, my dear." In that bright, hope-filled room, surrounded by gentle smiles, the family story found its new beginning. The sting of humiliation, the bitterness of anger, all faded into the past. The future glowed with promise, with a new life in Myra's arms and the unbreakable bond they shared. They had chosen understanding over pride, forgiveness over resentment, and love over all else. No one was perfect, and no one pretended to be. Yet the house that once felt so tense now felt like a home. And the little girl named Grace would grow up surrounded by people who had learned that true wealth was not about money or status, but about hearts that could heal, hands that could embrace, and souls that could forgive. And so, the quiet laughter and coos of a newborn child replaced all echoes of anger, bringing a soft and tender peace to that grand estate. A place that, at last, had truly become a place of love.